go. Here we go. So you can see here, can you see my slide? I think you can, but just wanted to make sure. As you see in the chat. Yuze, can you see my slide? Yes, you can see. Perfect. Thank you, Yuze. It's my participant attendance assistant today. Thank you, Yuze. Right. So I'm going to have a session today as a head tutor of the course on the exam study strategy and the structure. And I'm going to give you an idea of how we like to see answer the question. And then at the end of the session, that's going to last around an hour, I will give you a few three practice questions that we're not going to solve together, but that you can take away and do at home and use as a part of your exam strategy and revision. So what I will not do is indicate or talk about the content of the exam. Also, I don't know the content of the exam since I'm not involved in the exam writing. I've been involved though in the course development, so I was one of the lecturer who developed the course at the time. So what I would like to do first is talking about study strategy for those who are maybe less familiar with this type of social science exam. The structure of the exam that might change from last year. So what I'm presenting is last year. The logistics of the exam. So what format, how many questions, how much time. That is going to be given to you by the team. If you have any question about that, do contact your support team or Akona, who has been your tutor on the course. Okay, so tips and little suggestion. Everything is a suggestion, by the way. You take away, of course, depending on your own experience. If you are again familiar with doing the exam in the UK based on essay-based question. If you are familiar with social science, it should be quite obvious for you and familiar what I'm going to say. No, if you are not, then maybe it's more interesting to read this slide and maybe reread them again before the exam. So you will get this slide through the course content. Akona or the team will distribute them after this session. So you do not need to take picture of every slide. You will get them after. So the suggestion from the teaching team is to organize a study time, knowing that you're going to have a series of questions that are timed and that are also specific word counts, so you don't have an unlimited time to answer the exam. Is going to be quite pressured in terms of how much time you can have for each question. And even if you can choose question in a number of questions, so let's say you may have 8 questions and then you will choose 3 from 8, which I think is the format from this year. You want to make sure that you have covered a lot more topic than only 3 topic. And the reason is that sometimes even if you know the topic, you don't connect really well with the question, or maybe you don't understand that question really well, or you don't understand that specific angle really well. So you want to have covered the course material overall and made a schedule that allow you to do so. So when you are revising the course material, the idea for this type of exam, which is social science based and essay based, is to engage actively with the course material. So what you want to do is instead of passively reading, take notes, ask yourself questions, try to participate in discussion. And a way to do that, if you had the opportunity, which I'm not sure during the course, is to form some study group or maybe 1 or 2 participant or colleague that you know, and that you can then summarize your concept, exchange note, talking about concept together. So iteration, right? And talking about concept over and over again and talking about practice question, how to answer a practice question is key to this type of exam preparation versus passively reading the slide chronologically and not engaging with the material. Since the questions are generally about discussion, they are about argumentation, and they are about engagement with the topics. Try to actively recall, right, by summarizing key concepts from memory. So what you want to do is to be able to explain the key concept in your own word, right? It might be, of course, based on the course content, but what you want to do to make sure that you will, at the exam, be able to have a smooth answer is to also have a version of each concept or each framework with your own word or reframe in your own understanding. So what you want to avoid as well, and I will talk about this later, is anything that has to do with plagiarism. And that is also why I'm talking about reframing and rephrasing a concept rather than just reutilizing a definition. So one useful way to prepare this exam is also practice with practice question. So practice questions are a more active way to review the material, right? They give you an idea of the format and the type of question, and they also force you to really question your understanding of the concept rather than just re-informing you about, the concept is this is the definition, and that's a very passive way to look at the course. So you can use this practice question to test your understanding, and you can also use them to test your time management skills. So for example, when you know and you confirm the time you get at the exam, you can think about, okay, if I have 3 questions, 4 hours, that give me more or less that many minutes per question, give or take. So I'm going to see if I can develop one practice question in this amount of time, right? And that allows you to see, okay, I do know the concept and I'm able to, form a good answer to this question, but I'm too slow in regrouping the material I want to course. And that might indicate that your level of engagement of the course is not yet enough to actually perform really well on the exam. Is that what you want? And by the way, everybody has his own, I imagine, goal for the exam. Some of you may want really good mark, and some of you may not need specifically very good marks. So everybody, of course, want to have his own strategy depending of his own goal. Another good tip, if you can, as I mentioned, is the idea of study group. Collaborate with classmates, discuss and explain concept to others can really help you to explain, clarify, simplify the concept and reframe them in your own words. So you could quiz each other or sample problem. What is really suggested often is create your own practice questions. So you could do one topic, for example, the job demand resource model, and then wonder what kind of practice question or what kind of exam question could be around that topic, right? So you have like 3, 4 type of question, and then you can answer them by yourself. So that is a more active way to prepare the exam versus, just revising the slides one after the other. All right. Self-assessment and review is it's quite obvious. You identify where you are maybe less well prepared, focus your study effort on this topic, and ensure that you are understanding every concept really well. So a point on the plagiarism, maybe before I talk about tip to answer an exam question, is different elements that contribute to plagiarism. One of them is the referencing, right? And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can see if somebody write in the chat. Okay, yes, Bernie, sorry, I didn't see your question. The slides will be shared with you later. So I answer yes to this, okay? So in terms of plagiarism, I wanted to clarify, right? So when you're submitting the exam, your answer to the exam, your answer will be run automatically in a series of plagiarism software, right? So this will identify if you have similarity with source coming from anywhere on the internet, right? So these software are really, really good. They identify library around the world, PhD, unpublished work, anything. And also they will compare you answer or your exam answer to any other answer that has been submitted for the same exam, well, right? And I want to specify this because sometimes students don't realize this. But if you do work with somebody else to prepare this course, and as I suggest, as a study group, which I did at the time, you may have exchange note, or let's say we have today a practice question on the job demand resource model. You might decide to do it together with two other participants today, which will be a good idea. And then you develop your practice question, you exchange, this and that. And let's say at the exam, a question come up that is similar to that question. Possible, okay? So the issue is then, because you have worked on this note together, right? You may remember, you may have even, memorize some of it voluntarily or involuntarily, by the way, and you may restate more or less what was in the note at the same time, since they were similar to the question at hand. However, when the essay is then turned in the plagiarism software, it might pop up that your answer is similar to other people's answer in the same exam, in the same group, right? And of course, the software cannot identify who was the original author of the note, so it will flag, all the people involved in this. That's where you don't want to be, okay? So you want to make sure that when you are submitting your answer to the exam, these are entirely your own work, right? And I really insist, entirely your own work. If you feel that you may have used or restate material that might have been shared with somebody else, please do rephrase entirely the material so you're really, really sure that this is your own work and formulated with your own word. If you are using literal definition, right, from the course or from article, you need to reference them, okay? So if it's literal, completely literal, I mean word by word, then normally you need to bring in the author, the date, and the page number if there is a page number. That is very specific. And that is only if it's entirely literal. If, for example, you're talking about the job characteristic model and you want to define it, but it's not exactly the definition that is given in the course. So you have rephrased the definition with your own word. Then you still want to cite it since you know the author and the date, but you do not need to have the page number, right? So a question that I got a lot, it's about if I make some mistake in the reference. So let's say during the exam, I don't remember exactly how to reference this, paper, and I write up another author, or I don't remember the date. What happened then, right? So this is not a yes or no, black or white answer, because there is no real system or minus plus when you do that, right? So it's not that we're looking at the exam and we're like, oh yes, this is not the right reference, -1, +1. No, we don't do that. So what happened then is if generally your exam answer is citing the right author, right, even if you don't have the exact date, but it feels like, 80% of the time is the right author, you're found then right bang on the reference, and, we are confident that you are using the right reference for the right question, you're not going to be penalized if you make a spelling mistake, if you don't remember one date, if one of the author is, incorrect. If, however, systematically you're introducing the wrong author or you're using for a, I would say, base reference, a totally different author, or misspelling completely a name that has been used over and over in the course, then of course you will um, give the reader the impression that you may not have seen or studied the course correctly, or not understood all the concepts very well, or not understood all the reading really well. So that is where, of course, you get penalized, right? So it's not about minus plus, it's about if it's systematic, right? If you are not referencing at all, if it's constantly the wrong author, if there isn't any author, that of course raise question in whether or not you have correctly apprehended the material. So I wanted to clarify that point. Any questions so far before I continue? I'm going to see in the chat. I'm opening the chat now. No question. I therefore assume it's all clear for now. I'm going to go now to the tips to answer an exam question, right? And again, these are about structure and strategy and not content, and specifically since I don't have any information about the specific content of the exam. Right. I'm going to share my slide again. Okay, so the tips to answer exam question are the following. First, you want to have a priority in your source. So outside of the referencing, a very common question I'm getting in this session, the revision session, are can we use external source to answer the exam, right? So can I use reading or source that are outside the course to answer my question, right? Even if you don't, ask yourself this question now, I'm sure it's going to come up at some point. So the answer is we don't forbid you from using external source, right? And the reason is, of course, in this type of course, you may have a lot of different experience. Some may have already work experience. If we are, for example, in a question asking you to illustrate a concept, you may want or have a specific type of professional experience or example that totally fit that question, or you may just have read a book about it and that really answer the question really well, and you just remember that and you want to bring it in. So this is allowed. You can do that. However, there is a priority in the answer, right? In the term of the source. So when you look at the question, the first thing you should be doing is exhaust the course material, right? So yes, you can bring in external source, but essentially you need to use the knowledge that you've gained from the course material to inform your response, right? So you exhaust first the course material. Which reading can I use to support this? Which definition can I use? Which argument can I use? And when you don't see anymore what you can use, then you are welcome to look at external sources, maybe an additional example, maybe an additional book that you have read, and yes, you are welcome to add it on. But do not base your answer in a specific question with or by material that is not from this course, right? So you really want to show the marker that you have seen the course, you have learned the course, you have understood the course, and you can only do that if you actually use the material that is being seen in this course, right? So various framework and theoretical model have been presented. You have a lot of different topic. A lot of different topic are linked, right? So we know that it's your job to choose for each question the more specific element and concept and framework that are fitting that question. And generally the questions are very clear. So there is no sneaky question or trick question. The question are straightforward. You're talking about specific concept and it's very clear what you generally needs to do, right? So essentially, you need to apply the academic tool provided by the course to structure your thought and your arguments. And that summarizes what I said about the external course. Use evidence from the core and essential reading first, right? You have been provided with a list of core and essential reading, which are typically academic article, textbook, or other material, and you're expected to reference cite this reading to support your argument, to demonstrate that you have engaged with the course, and using them as reference to back up your statement and your overall discussion. Right? Just want to be very clear on that. And that generally answers quite a lot of questions that I receive in the revision session. Okay, another point that I want to make is where should I be or how should I feel before I do the exam? At which point of preparation can I feel that I am ready? What are the elements I need to know to see and judge that I am ready for the exam, right? So that answer can be explored by understanding the learning outcome of this course, right? So there is a series of learning outcome, and if you feel you are able to master the different bullet point on this slide, it probably signals that you are in a good position to answer the exam, right? So the first outcome is to recognize, right? So you need to be able to recognize, that means identify and define a range of theoretical perspective, right, which are underlying the ways in which organization manage the EOR, which is the employment relationship, and the deployment of a human resource strategy practice, and also the setup of HRM policy, right? So you need to be able to describe the different components of a specific framework, concept, theory, and the expected influence in the organization. That means that you need to know the relationship between the concept, right? So there are relationships such as if I increase this, then engagement will increase. Or if I decrease workload, then well-being will, so you need to be able to juggle with the different article and reading that describe relationship between concept and framework, right? If I do this, then one of the consequences can be burnout, and that is supported by this reading and by this author, for example. So when you use your knowledge of the theory to describe this relationship, you need to think about two different levels. And that's quite important because very often students manage very well to describe benefit of, for example, or risk of a specific concept on one level, but sometimes forget the other, right? So generally, when you're talking about a specific concept, such as well-being, right, in human resource management, there are benefit and consequence for the employee, which is the individual, but also the organization, right? So you need to think about the two levels when you answer the question. Sometimes the question tells you, I want to focus your answer on the individual level, but sometimes the question doesn't. If the question doesn't, you want to think about what are the positive elements that the individual, the employee, will incur from this specific relationship or this specific concept, but what also are the risks and the benefit for the organization, right? So for example, if an employee leave, right, or feel in psychological contact breach, there are some problem, consequence, and risk for this individual, right? Could be alienation, could be burnout, can be lower job satisfaction, can be intention to leave, right? And there is also organizational consequence, such as performance and other elements that influence the overall organization, right? So you need to think about these two levels, and sometimes the consequence and the benefits are the same for the individual and the organization, and sometimes they are different, right? And you want to make sure that you evaluate the effectiveness of each concept looking at these two levels. Okay. You want to look at the different perspective, and you will see there is a practice question on this in the perspective of today workplace, right? So some of the model may be developed in the year, I don't know, 80s or 90s or even before that. These are basic conceptual model which are really important to understand. But today the workplace is different from where it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. There is lots of new technology, right? There's remote working, today there is AI. This is creating a lot of difference in organizational structure, in job design, and some of the questions may ask you to consider limitation of the model when they were elaborated at the time, and how can you revise or expand or suggest add on to this model that might cater to the organizational needs. So that's really important to, when you see a model, be able to understand its limitation, right? Its context. That model has been developed, for example, Herzberg's two-factor theory was developed in that specific context at the time. This context has evolved. Therefore, it might be that it needs, expansion or different element that might be required to better cater to this organizational need, right? So you want to be able to comment on the limitation of the model and the implication for the practice, right? So you need to understand also the challenge that are involved in the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of any EVHM approach that we've seen and specific practice area. So these are the different elements that are part of the outcome of this course. If you feel that you are able to master these different bullet points, you probably are in a good position towards the exam. I'm going to now look at a specific element of the question, and then I'm going to give you, to go with you through a sort of like model structure of an answer, so you understand the different parts, because the structure is really important, the different part of the answer, and then I'm going to let you go with 3 practice questions. Right. So what are we expected to answer, and how are we expected to answer? What are the examiner looking for when they will look at you answer and mark them, right? So the question are formulated as generally discussion question or illustration question or conceptual question. Some are very theoretical, so they're really based on the concept and the theory, and they ask you to develop this, define this. Some are more practical, so they may ask you to develop a concept but illustrate it, or discuss a question and illustrate it. I see a question in the chat. Or maybe somebody wanted to ask a question. Go ahead, Mohammed. I seen your hands, no? I'm going to stop sharing. Or it's in the Q&A. Are citation necessary? Will there be a loss of mark if we don't cite? Okay. Um, the citation are necessary. Yes, you should always cite, right? So one of the reason is plagiarism, right? That's obvious. So you want to make sure that it doesn't come across you are taking over some idea and concept that you know are not yours, right? So if you using a specific theoretical framework, it's expected from you that you know it's obviously not you who came up with that framework, and you need to know the author and ideally the date, right? So as I mentioned before, if you do some inaccuracy in your referencing, it will not be penalized systematically. So it's not that we saying, okay, you had like 5 reference that are not correct, therefore is -5. No, we don't do that. But if it's systematical or you don't reference at all, right? If you don't reference at all, first you might fall into plagiarism, but also you are not going to indicate that you have seen the concept and the reading really well, since you don't seem to know the author of this framework. So you cannot identify the framework with the right author and the date, right? So yes, it's important when you revise the material of this course to identify the framework and match it with the author and ideally the date, right? Even if during the exam, obviously, maybe with the stress, the rush, and the time, you don't remember every single one of them, right? In doubt, for plagiarism, you need to oversight rather than undercite, right? So if the material is being seen in the slide, generally you can cite the course, right? You don't need to reference everything. Obviously, some of the material that you're rephrasing might be your own rephrasing of the material, and that's fine. But if it's a specific framework and an author or a specific reading, yes, you need to reference. um, Okay, I'm going to address another question. Is studying only content from the study guide okay, or do we need to use the essential reading? You need to use the essential reading, right? So the essential reading are essential. The study guide will help you in answering the question, but will only bring you so far, right? So if you want, that depends, of course, what you mean by okay. If you want to pass the course, right? And I cannot answer that question. Obviously, it depends the question that you're going to get at the exam, but it might be okay to maybe be limited by the study guide. But if you want to have a good mark or a really good mark in this course, you definitely need to be able to use the essential reading, right? And might even be if you can, and if you go really in the highest mark, you might want, if you have time, to use 1 or 2 additional reading, right? No, I don't have, sorry, I don't have any summary per chapter here. We don't have the time, unfortunately, on the limited time we have. So that, unfortunately, I don't have as part of the session. So, and what is the question here? So is it like, uh, from Yuse, is it like the unfolding model is based on, can you rephrase your question, Yuse? I'm not sure I understand it. If you can rephrase your question. Any topic of chapter to focus on, I will not be able to say, and I will not be allowed to say anyway, even if I had that answer. I've been formally banned to talk about the content, and I didn't write the exam, so I'm not able to help you with that. For the citation, is it something like that? Oh, right, okay. Right, okay, I understand now, Yuse. So the citation, right? So yes, you can say based on this theory, that's completely fine. At least we understand that is reference on a name of an author, right? If you have a name of an author, or you can say between brackets, right? The author name and the date, right? So you can say whatever you want to say. You can, say, so I suggested in, this article, and then you just say the author and the name. That is another way to cite it and reference, right? So if you don't remember the date, please just put the author name that you remember, and that's fine as well, right? But obviously, ideally, the citation rule, right, is the author and the date. Right. So because the question is I'm finding, a specific chapter quite hard. Is it okay if I don't revise that chapter? Okay, so it's difficult for me to say, right? Because it depends on the question you have at the exam. But obviously, right, it's a bit your strategy as well, because you know that you're going to get an amount of question and only asked to answer three. So you obviously can choose three questions that are not looking at this specific chapter. Also, generally the question, and again, I didn't write the exam, so I'm not able to say for sure, but generally the question are only focusing on one concept, right, at the time. So it's generally, again, I don't know, not the case that every question is mixing concept in chapter. So in this case, right, you may be in more safe ground to, in fact, you're right. If I'm really finding a specific chapter difficult, maybe I just don't look at that chapter and I focus on the rest. It can be a strategy, right? Of course, the danger is in the question. Maybe, the other question that you are seeing, you don't really connect with them. And then you feel, oh my God, you know, I shouldn't have looked at that chapter because that question for that chapter I find quite easy, of course. But, that's your strategy. So I think everybody's is doing is optimal strategy considering how many questions you need to answer for the exam, right? But yes, the exam, we should have been, by the way, the logistics should have been confirmed by the team, is and for me while preparing the exam. Well, that's what the whole session is about, right? So you will receive the slide and it's about, so I have given you the learning outcome, and then so I was talking about what the different element of the question are, and now I'm going to talk about a little bit of the structure of the question. Yes, they generally are sub-question, right? And you need obviously to answer every single sub-question. So whatever the sub-question is, you need to go back to this. So for example, maybe the question, you will have three practice questions in this session, right? Maybe the first sub-question is, can you define the concept? And maybe the second sub-question is, can you illustrate it with two examples? And then maybe the third sub-question is, do you think that this model, or can you suggest something that will make this model more relevant in today's organization, right? So that could be three different type of sub-question, and you need to answer each sub-question that you see in the question, right? One question support will come from the same chapter. Generally, right? Generally, based on my experience, again, I cannot say for sure since I don't have the exam question, so I cannot say for sure about that. Okay, wait, because I see other people are also Q&A in the chat, so I'm going to open the chat now. How many marks which can be the new pattern of answer three question? How many subpart will be in their question? I'm unable to answer about the exam question and the marking. The marks will be given to you when you see the question, right? And how many subpart as well, right? So you can try to ask the team or a corner, but I doubt they will be able to, or they will be allowed to answer you this question. Is example important? Yes, that's right. I also got this information that will be confirmed by the team, by the way, that the new format require you to answer 3 questions. That is right. Yes. I don't know about the mark, and that will be given you by the team, right? So in terms of how many mark is given you by the team. It's not going to be very different in my experience from one question to another. So I will expect more or less equal mark, right? So the questions are made such that you choose, 3 questions among a set of questions, and the 3 questions are more or less equal, right? So that is generally the format, but I cannot say for sure. To expect us to integrate other topic content in an answer, right? It's a good question, Cara, because every topic is really related to each other in this course, in HRM, right? So sometimes I will go the other way and say that it's difficult to avoid to talk about other topic when you talk about one specific topic. However, because the word count is quite limited, right? And also the time is limited. And you will see, I think the time is more the pressure here than really the word count, because the time is so limited, you don't have much time for each question. I really do think that you want to focus on the question at hand, right? So one of the mistake, unfortunately, that often students make or participants make is reading the question, and in the question there is one angle, right, that is linked to the question but doesn't really answer the question that they know very well, and then they use all the word to talk about that angle. Or even worse, they talk about the topic for 2 minutes and then they talk about another topic for all the rest of the question, because they know that other topic better, right? So let's say, GCM, right? We ask you to describe and define that, and then you talk about that, and then you start to talk about directly about well-being and the impact on well-being, and then you talk about well-being for 400 words on 600, right? So that is an issue. So what you want to do is really stay close to the question, right? So the question is generally asking you to stay really, really close to one topic of one framework, right? It will maybe help ask you to illustrate, to give example. When it does ask you to give example, you have to give example. If it doesn't ask you to illustrate, then you don't have to give an example. So it's very important to read the instruction really, really well and the question really, really well, because if it doesn't ask you to illustrate and you don't have to put example, you're losing more than putting example. Then it's better to be more theoretical and stay about the argument and the suggestion and discuss the question at hand. If the question says specifically, please give me 2 examples, do give 2 examples, not 3, not 5, 2, okay? So it's really important to really, really, really follow the instruction to the letter and go back. What kind of example? So that depends. If, for example, the question is, can the manager, do you think that the manager can influence the psychological contract, right? Yes or no? And if you do think so, can you give 2 examples? Okay, so typical type of question. Okay, so my stance will be, first you need to take a stance. So you don't want to stay yes, maybe, no. Okay, so you want to be very clear. If the question asks you to take a position, you need to take a position. It doesn't mean you need to be completely black or white, because obviously we ask you to discuss, right? So yes, the manager can influence the psychological contract in some instance and with limitation, right? Okay. The example, no, they can be fictitious. So, for example, if you don't have any professional experience, right, then I suggest you use example from the course, right? So there are case in the course, there are article in the course, there are reading in the course. They all give you quite a lot of example for each concept. So if you're thinking about a case, something from the course that you can use as an example, even fictitious, you use that as an example, okay? If you have a specific professional experience, real example that you want to give, of course, you're welcome to give it, or it can be fictitious. So you can just think about, okay, in this case, the manager could develop a bi-weekly meeting where he will then talk about performance evaluation earlier in the year and involve the participant in setting goals, for example, right? Can we directly use the example from the study guide? Yes, you can, right? So if the example totally answer the question or illustrate the question perfectly, there is no need to come with another example. You can definitely say, as for example, the manager can do, and it can be something that has been already said in the study guide, right? So you're not supposed in this exam, I wanted to clarify that because it's often indeed something that the participant feel. We're not is not an originality marketing exam, right? This is a human resource exam. So you're not supposed or expected to invent new concepts, to come up with like incredible exams that have never been seen before, to come up with incredible, new framework, right? Or anything like this. What we're asking you is to think and to understand the framework from the course and apply them in different situations, or think about how can you apply them in real life, right? And yes, in some question we could ask you, okay, now with the arrival of new technology, how do you think, or give me one element that you can think be added to this model to make it more useful and relevant for practice? That could be a question, right? And that would be very specific, and that would be very directed towards a specific element and a specific framework. So the questions are generally quite specific, and they're generally very related to the concept seen in the course. Okay? Right, I think I've exhausted the question on the example. I'm going to go back to my slide now. Okay, there's some other question. I do not believe there is a bell curve, right? I never used one in my marking ever, actually. So I do not believe there is a bell curve. No, there is, however, some expectation for each level of marking, and University of London, it's quite high in terms of marking, right? So the expectation are quite high in terms of, and that's why we have the revision session in terms of understanding what is expected from you, more in type of what type of structure of answer than also obviously the content, but also the type of structure of the answer. If I'm not sure about the sample paper, there might some available. Then you need to ask Akona and the team about that. How to maximize the time allocation for each question? I think what is very difficult is very individual question, obviously, but I think what you want to do in that type of exam is you want to quickly decide which question you're going to answer, right? So you have your set of question, and then you decide on, let's say, the 3 questions you want to answer. And then what I suggest, that was one of the suggestions of my mentor at the time, is the first thing you do is to write up as a draft, something you're not submitting even, a little backbone of each of the answer for the 3 questions you're going to do. And I think that alleviate the stress overall. So you take 5 minutes to just have a little structure for each question, right? You say, okay, I'm going to use this 3 reading, I'm going to use this 3 argument for that question, and then for that question, I'm going to use this, I'm going to answer that, right? And then the 3rd question. And that help you to see, okay, I'm better connected, I have more element for the 2nd question in my 3 question I've chosen. And what you want to do is maybe spend a bit more time, although of course you want to make sure that you are finishing each question, right? You want to, you might spend a bit more time on the question that you are mastering better, right? What you want to avoid though, right, is to spend too much time on the number one question, then you have no time for the two other, because it's better to have three finished questions than one really good question and then that's the only question that you've answered, right? So you want to be mindful to make sure that if you go too slow, you need to pass to the second question. So that's a little bit your time allocation in terms of that, but you need to divide your time. And then I think it alleviates the stress a lot if you already see as a little draft what do you know already about the question. And also with the stress, it might happen that after the first question, you were so focused on the first question, you don't actually remember what you were going to answer for the second. So if you have already this bit of note, you can go back to it and just expand on that. And I think that saves you, from my experience, a lot of stress when you're actually sitting in the exam and getting quite tired because it's quite intense, right? But that's my own strategy suggestion, if that makes sense, in terms of time allocation for each question, right? But what you want to avoid for sure is to stop in the middle of a question, right? So that's a bit sad because you could have developed it till the end, probably. So you want to make sure that you are at least developing each question, and you also don't want to think too much that you will have time to go back, right? So do not start to let it go in the middle, go the second one, and then think I'm going to go back, because very often what I find is you just don't have the time to do that, right? So you want to finish up like the first question, and then you go to the second, and then you go to the third, and maybe you start with the one that you know the most about, that is the easiest to write, or the other way around, depending on your own strategy. But definitely three finished questions are quite important in this time. So you want to think about that for sure. Thank you for that question. Good question. All right. All right. All right. I'm going to share a little bit more because time goes on. Here we go. Right. There's a different part. Here we are. So the structure of the answer, right? So how does one answer look like in terms of structure, right? So what we expecting to see? I think that I just wanted to spend a bit of time. If you already answered or participate in a lot of exam in the UK and for social science, you probably know that already, but if you didn't, you probably don't know very well. So I just wanted to make sure that we are going through that. So generally, it's well received. It is not mandatory. This is just a suggestion of structure, by the way. But a suggestion is to have a little introduction, right? Or an introductory paragraph to your answer. So you clearly and concisely present your argument, right? So it's not a development already, it's just sort of a roadmap for both you and the examiner. And it also gives an indication of what you're going to address, right? So if the discussion is about, as I mentioned, let's say psychological contract, then you want to say research suggests that manager can influence the psychological contract, especially at the beginning of the employer relationship, since research suggests that most of the psychological contract is actually formed before the employee start his first day in the company, for example, right? And then you may say, I will use reading from this author and that author to explain this, and I will also include limitation link with the influence of the contract that might occur in situation of psychological breach, for example, in this and that. So that's it, right? So you just explaining your stance, what you're going to say, what your main argument is. You don't need to develop your argument, just setting the tone for your answer, right? Right after this, what you want to do is to define the key term. So yes, you need to bring a few definitions, right? Especially if you're talking about concept and element that are not familiar to people who might not have seen. So the benchmark for this is somebody who has not been part of this course. Does somebody like that knows what psychological safety is? Probably, right? Does somebody who didn't see this course knows what burnout is? Probably, right? But does somebody who has not seen this course knows what the GCM model is? Probably not, right? So then you want to define. If it's the answer is a no to somebody who didn't follow the course knows about this term, you need to define it. When you define, you have two choices. Either you have learned literally a definition from the course that you just cite. If it's just like from a slide, you can cite it from the course. If it's an author, a reading, you cite the reading. If it's a rephrasing of the definition, right? You've taken it from a reading, but it's in your own word. You still want to give credit to the author, right? That is the base of your definition, and the date if you can remember it, but you don't need to give the page number, right? So the page number will only be when you're citing somebody literally precisely and you know there is a page number, right? And in this type of exam, it will not be expected from you that you remember page number specifically. So what you want to do is just rephrase definition in your own word, and when you know they are from this or that author, just credit the author that you know the definition is from. Okay, middle of the argument. So the main body of the answer is the argument, right? And you want to at least suggest a few, one or two or three points that go in one way, right? Yes, the manager can influence the contract, and then also balance it with elements that might include develop the limitation, right? So you want to be very clear that each framework that you are discussing has its own limitation and its own context, and you know about that, right? It doesn't mean you can't take a stance. It doesn't mean that you don't have your own voice, but your voice is supported by evidence and material from this course, right? So when a discussion is expected or we asking you discuss or talk about, it doesn't mean you saying what you think about the concept. It means you discussing and saying it based or using craft material from this course mainly. Okay, so that's the idea. So use clear and concise language. Avoid unnecessary description. You don't have neither the time nor the space. And ensure, that's very important, that each paragraph is integrated with the next. So what I mean here is sometimes, especially for people who are less familiar with social science course, the answer feel a bit like a bullet point list or a shopping list, right? Yes, engagement, la la la, and the second point is, and also satisfaction, la la la, and employee can also have, loyalty issue, and it feels like three disconnected elements, right? It can be good argument, it can be well supported, but it feels disconnected. So you can do that, but then you need to have a very good, and that's my last point, conclusion, or you want to link each argument to one another, right? It doesn't mean integrate it in each other. It means just like, you're discussing with someone, there is a link from one element to another. And that leads me to the last point, which is a concluding paragraph, right? So you need a wrap up of your response, and in the concluding paragraph, you not introduce new elements. So the conclusion is a place where you just reiterate, highlight the main point, and you put it all together so the reader understands, oh yes, yes, I know, understand globally, and finally what the whole argument is leading towards, right? So it's a well-crafted conclusion. Again, what you want to avoid here in the conclusion is new element you didn't bring before, super original conclusion or really beautifully written, but that have taken way too much time and you have maybe deprioritized other element of the exam. So you want to keep the conclusion sort of straightforward. Of course, you want to give a lasting impression, but that is based on summarizing the main argument and not introducing new idea or a totally new paragraph. Okay, so not the place to start a new discussion. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing before I share the practice question and see the mini question. How many parts are in the one question? I believe generally 3, but again, I'm not entirely sure about the exam format, right? The exam format is to be formalized and discussed with the team or ACONA. Can empirical evidence be used as an example? Right? Wait, or I see. So the question is interesting question. What you, if I pronounce that correctly, can empirical evidence be used as an example? As example, for example, all right. Right. It depends on the question, right? So if the question is leading towards asking you to illustrate practically, right? So if it's about really illustrate practically and the question is really leading towards illustrate an application of that concept in real life, right? Then I will hold off looking at research or reading as an example. If in the paper, if Griffin's research, you have a specific example that is a practical example, yes, you can obviously use it. But if it's another theoretical argument, I will then use it in your main body, right? The questions are generally very clear and the examples are generally practical. So they generally geared towards, okay, no, you have defined the GCM theoretically. You have explained if you think that it's tailored to today's organization or not, and what you should maybe add. And then to give 2 illustration of this meaning, practical example that really force you to think about in an organization, what does it mean practically? So that will be very practical. So I will think about that in terms of example. Right. Let me share to end the session the practice question, and then I will let you go away with this question. So we have 3 practice questions. There's one of them that is being developed for you. You will see that in the slide as a structure, right? We will not give you a model answer since could be a lot of different answers, but we're giving you an idea of a structure for the first one. So the first question is, and this question I given to you so you have an idea of the type of question you're going to get, right? So you can prepare the way you're answering the question. The first question is, what is the job characteristic model? How well is this model suited for today's job, right? And what could you do to expand the model for modern organizational requirement, right? First question. That's quite theoretical, but also a little bit practical at the end, right? Second question, what is meant by the phrase talent management, and what are the main difference between talent management and human resource management, right? So give two examples of challenge in talent management implementation and what organization can do to increase their effectiveness in talent management. So you can see in this question, there is lots of sub-questions. So you need to really take time to answer every single sub-question, right? So in this question, the second one, what you want to avoid to do is defining talent manager for 300 words. Let's say the maximum is 600 words per question. And then define human resource management for 200 words. And then you have 100 words at the end that sort of just comparing the two, right? So that is too descriptive. What you want to do is immediately answer the question at hand, which is what are the main difference between the talent management and the human resource management? So yes, you need to define talent management. That's what we're asking you in the first question, the first sentences. But then after that, you immediately start to talk about the difference. So you can talk about talent management and human resource management by already explaining and contrasting both, right? So that's what the kind of thing that will be expected in this type of question. Then the last practice question that is given to you is direct voice. So explain direct voice and indirect representative voice and their difference from different scholarly perspective, right? With example. To what extent are the various schools, various schools in terms of employee voice and discipline perspective needed, and then can they coexist? So in this type of question, what I can often see is students forget to answer, can they coexist, right? So because you're focusing on the first part of the question, then the second part of the question, and then somehow the last part of the question is forgotten. So be mindful to go back. And so that's why my suggestion to do maybe a little bit of draft, to go back to each answer and then really specifically go back, make sure that you answer the first part, the second part, and the third part, and address can they coexist in your answer, right? To finish the session, and then I'll let you go, is a sort of development of the first question as a backbone, right? So what is the GCM? How well suited is the GCM for today's job? And what could be done to expand the model for modern organizational requirement? So a good idea, again a suggestion, because in this type of exam, there is no one answer fit all, right? Many different answers can lead to high mark. It depends how well you argumenting, what type of argument you're bringing in, right? So first part, explain the GCM. That's quite straightforward. You can bring a definition that you already know. You can bring a definition that is your own word, right? You explain what the GCM is about. Then suitability. Assess how well the GCM align with the requirement, right? And discuss the relevance of this model in the context of today's work. So now you have different elements, and that's where, of course, answer can be very different. You have different elements in today's work that are different from yesterday work, right? So you can look at technology, you can look at remote working, you can look at boundaryless career, you can look at generational elements. So you want to focus on one element that you considering that has really changed today's work, that you know maybe quite well or you've thought about quite a lot, and you want to talk about that, right? So let's say I think that AI is going to totally change organizational structure and job design, and therefore the GCM should maybe be expanded or rethought in the context of this, right? So in that context, thinking about new advancement of technology, how can I highlight and focus on limitation where this model today may fall short, right? So there are element or factor that the GCM is not incorporating because it has been developed at a time where this factor were not existing, that we might want to expand today, right? So you want to propose ways to adapt this model to a better suit to today's organization need, right? So for example, you could incorporate new factors that are related to work-life balance, remote work and technology, right? And then as a last part, you have to suggest how this organization can integrate this principle into their job design process to make sure that not only you have thought about the element but is integrated in the job design, right? And that eventually, based on the GCM, will enhance the employee engagement and the performance, which is the two level that I thought about in the beginning of this session. I thought about the individual level and the employee level, and that will help the relevance of the model in today's workplace, right? So that will be, for example, an example of how you could develop this question. Okay, so I'm at the end of my slide. I'm going to look at if there are. Okay, so there is one additional question on the GCM that I'm taking, and the question is, for the GCM question, will we need to define what is job design as an introduction? So yes, you will need to, yeah, because it's as I mentioned, the yes, should I define or not is as a ballpark. Um, Defined by the idea that does somebody that has seen this course or has not seen this course knows about. If you're not seen this course, do you know about this model? Are you able to define it? If the answer is a no, then you want to define. So you don't want to assume that the marker or the reader knows about all the concepts. You still to redefine them when this is a non-familiar concept, okay? So yes, you will need to define it. As part of the introduction, right? It doesn't need to be super descriptive. You can just say the GCM often suggested or defined as, and boom, you're defining it and you're integrating that already in your body, right? Because you don't have much time and you don't have much word. So you don't want to have like an entire paragraph for a big definition. You can integrate your definition in your discussion already. In the event that I can finish the paper, will I still get some mark if I have some content in point form? Yes, you will, for sure. You definitely will, but be mindful that it's really about answering the question. So it's definitely not a bullet point type of exam, right? So I will not be very optimistic in terms of will I get nearly all the point? Definitely not, right? Yes, you will get some point, more than zero, obviously. It depends what you're writing. It depends where you are able to stop, right? That's why I suggested, from what I've seen before, that you at least try to finish the answer, even if maybe you feel, oh, I should have brought more argument in my body, this and that, rather than letting go a question entirely, right? Unless, of course, you have to because you don't know any of the other question. But if you can answer three questions and you feel you have material and try to allocate your time in a way that allow you to at least finish the question, right? Okay, so that is part of the strategy. You will obviously get some point, even of course you are at the middle, you will of course get some point, that makes sure, but it's an essay-based question, right? So it's really about the overall discussion here and not, oh yeah, I given half of the question, so if half of the mark. It doesn't really work that way. That makes sense. Thank you for your question, Fanny. That was a good question. Okay. If I don't, okay, I'm going to answer a few more questions. The new, the sample paper, you have to ask the team. I cannot provide you sample paper. You have to ask Akona the team. Will doing past paper help? It might be, I mean, past paper are similar to practice question, right? So it helps in the same way than doing practice question. I don't know that doing past paper might help more, right? The content of the course has not changed, right? So it's still the same content and it's still the same type of question. So I would assume that, you know, if you actively engaging with the content, that's probably is enough to prepare the question, right? It's really about understanding not only the content, but also the type of question and how can I answer this type of question. Yes, empirical evidence is important. What I don't exactly know what you exactly mean by empirical evidence, but if you mean readings and an argument coming from the reading, yes. If it's about fact and figure, you will be not expected to remember statistic if that is what you mean, and number in this type of answer, and it's generally more broad answer than number answer. Is as an experiment. Oh, yes. So yes, of course, you said an experiment is fine. You're not expected to cite statistics or, you know, go back with the statistics of the reading or this and that. That will not be expected in this type of exam, right? Of course, if you remember some statistic, or if there are obvious statistics that you remember completely and they are coming from the reading, you of course welcome to bring them in. But the discussion is generally more general and is based on arguments from the reading that are based on the statistics, but the findings are, you know, you want to focus on the findings rather than focusing on the statistic, if that makes sense, right? So when you look at an academic article, what you want to look at is the research question, right? What is the research question that allow you to see what is the article really answering here, right? The type of methodology, was it qualitative or was it quantitative? Because that allow you to see what are the relationship here. If it's a quant, then you have a specific relationship that is established, a causality. If it's qualitative, it's more contextual. So the type of argument that it gives you is different. And then you want to look at the findings. So the statistics are leading to the findings and the discussion, and you want to really focus on what are the three more important findings in that article, right? And that helps you to summarize a big academic article in a pager, right? Because you're not going to be able to remember the whole article when you are at the exam. You're just going to remember the main findings and the research question. Well, you're not going to be able to connect directly, but you will definitely be able to answer all your additional questions through Akona, and she can contact me, right? So if you have a specific question about something that is, you know, coming from this slide that you're going to receive, you can ask the question to Akona, and she will then direct the question to me if she can't answer it, right? So that's how we'll proceed. What can I first Akona, so you know Akona, right? She's your tutor, so Akona definitely, or any contacts you have from the team that you are in contact with, any support email, any something like that. That will be the team to connect with for the sample paper, and they will email you or not. What they can email you. How the mark? I don't know, Mohammed. I don't know how the mark are divided for each question. It might be that the team will answer you that, or it may be they might not be allowed to. So I'm not sure, and I can't discuss the exam paper with you. And anyway, I don't know the exam paper, so I will not be able to say. Anyway, okay. So if there is no additional question on the content of this slide, I will let you go now. And I thank you so much for being part of the session and attending the session. And thank you for your engagement and plenty of luck for the exam and for your professional life as well. So thank you so much for that. And I wish you a great afternoon, everyone. There is no more further question. Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate it.